Hey everyone, you're watching Conversations in Pop Culture, and I'm your host, Andrew Davis, and this episode is brought to you by my sponsors, BCW Supplies. Use code POPANIMECOMICS to get 10% off your entire order. It is an affiliate link, and inflation sucks, and BCW Supplies sells you bags, boards, long boxes that protect your comics and your valuables. They also protect your trading cards, and anything that you collect, they can protect. So use that code. I get a kickback that helps to fund this show. You get 10% off your order. Inflation sucks, as I stated. It's only going to get worse. And well, I just placed an order and I saved myself like $30. So there you go. And also, I have a Redbubble t-shirt right here. It's making fun of Taco Bell, Gundam, Fallout, as well as the most interesting man in the world. And it is tacos, and I do like tacos. So please go buy my shirt if you are a fan of any of those things. It's available in 16 different colors. And I'm not going to bore everybody with the rest of my sponsors because I have with me comic creator John Crowther. So hopefully I got the name right. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew. You got it perfect.
Yeah, no, now I'm very, very excited to have you on. Obviously, lots going on. You got 2 Kickstarters currently going on. One with Silverline and Roland was on last night. And then you got the one that I want to talk about first, which is Terry Funk, the hardcore wrestling biography, because I'm a huge wrestling fan. And that one is with Squared Circle Comics. So before we get too deep into it, what is the basic premise of this comic? Because I think a lot of people know who Terry Funk is, but they're going to be like, oh man, there's a comic of him that's out.
Yeah. So Terry, his book is one of a line of comics that I've worked on. And what they are is they're biographical. So I sit down with each individual wrestler, usually by telephone, because, we're all in different areas. He's out in Amarillo. But we sit down and we discuss their life and we get their life story, at least the highlights that they see as of their life story. What I try and do with the wrestling comics, though, is stay as kayfabe as I can on the matches, because I grew up a wrestling fan. I grew up here in Florida with championship wrestling from Florida with the Grahams. Of course, I saw Terry come through quite a few times. And then eventually, to date myself, eventually I would see WWF eventually made its way onto Saturday Night Main Events. And then we, watched WCW at 7:05 on a TBS. I watched a lot of that as a kid. I loved wrestling, still do. Probably a bigger fan of the older stuff. But I like to stay true to the matches and to that magic that I experienced as a kid. So that's what we've done with Terry. We tell his background, a little bit of background about his dad, obviously about his brother as well, and how Terry got into wrestling and his initial training, and then through his matches and through his whole entire career, actually. Again, hitting the highlights.
Yeah, and we're gonna dive into some of this and really go into it and go into the fact that it's very much primary sourced.
Yeah.
But how did you even get into all this? Because obviously this is not your first wrestling book that you've done. It's a series of them that you've done with a bunch of different artists. I think there's 4 or 5, if I'm not mistaken. And so how did all this come about? Because people love wrestling. Comics are a cousin to wrestling. Much like anime is a cousin to wrestling and comics. And everything else is a cousin, really, in this sector. Some are closer than others. So we're going to put it that way. But how did you get into even this coming into your lab, you being approached to do it, or all that fun stuff?
Yeah, it's everything is kind of like things falling into my lap at the right time. I had a daughter when I first started getting into comics. This is around 2014, 2015, who was 13 years old. I would take her to comic book conventions and pay, upwards of $50 or $60 a day to walk into these conventions and walk around with her. And I would see her trying to emulate a lot of the female comic book characters, and I wasn't happy with what she was presented with at that age. In my personal opinion, I thought a lot of the female characters were over-sexualized. And I've been a firm believer that if you don't like something, do something about it. So what did I do? I sat down and I wrote my first comic, which was about a teenage girl with cockroach DNA. It was called Rochelle. Rochelle made its debut with a Florida publisher called AC Comics before getting picked up by Antarctic Press. And we ended up doing 2 3-issue runs with Antarctic Press. But what that led to was I found out that wrestlers are big comic book fans themselves, and fans of toys and all the things that I was fans of. And a mutual friend of mine and a gentleman by the name of Nikolai Volkov got my comic in the hand of Nikolai and gave Nikolai my phone number. And Nikolai reached out and he asked me, he said, how would you like to write my life story as a comic book? And I about fell out of my chair. I mean, here I'd grown up watching Nikolai first as the Russians with Koloff here in Florida, and then eventually watching him in the WWE and WrestleMania 1. I mean, he was huge. And of course I said, yeah, I said, hey, why haven't you done it before? He said, I've had a lot of guys promise me a lot of things, but when it comes down to it, nobody ever gets the job done. And I said, well, Nikolai, I can promise you right now, if I tell you I'm going to do something, I'm going to get it done. So I wrote my first script for Nikolai after interviewing him and reached out to my artist on Rochelle, a gentleman by the name of Del Barris, who, tying in, he's actually the artist on Team Beta with the Silverline Kickstarter as well. And told him what I was doing, and he said, let's do it, right? Send me the script, I'll draw it. He did, and then I reached out to a mutual friend of ours by the name of Amanda Rachels, who is partnered up with a gentleman by the name of Kevin Laporte in Alabama, and they had a publishing company called Inverse Press. Subsequently, they've changed the name to Flatline Comics, but they happen to be wrestling fans too. I had no idea. I'd backed a few of their Kickstarters. I saw that they were very successful. I think they were 27.
They have one campaign that scares me.
What's that?
I have issues with clowns. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh yeah. What is that? Yeah, their clown comic is a trip. But I backed a lot of their stuff, and I knew they were go-getters. They were the type of people that if they told you they were going to do it, again, they got it done. So I reached out to them. Lo and behold, big wrestling fans. Kevin had grown up watching a lot of wrestling out of Dothan, Alabama. His mom was a big wrestling fan. He said, I'd love to do this. Let's put it together. So we did Nikolai's first. Nikolai eventually introduced me to Bruno Sammartino. And I did Bruno's book. Bruno, and through that, I met Brian Blair. If you know about Brian Blair, he was half the Killer Bees. And Brian Blair is also the president of the Cauliflower Alley Club, which is an organization that seeks to raise money for a lot of these retired wrestlers. Without getting too far into it, a lot of, back in the day, you might, Ric Flair might have called himself a wheeling and dealing, limousine riding and all of that, but a lot of that was play. These guys weren't making the kind of money that the guys make today.
It also is similar to comics and a lot of these older comic people, like the Hero Initiative type thing.
Absolutely. So a lot of these guys, they work for different territories. They were independent contractors. They didn't have insurance. And as they get older in life, you jump off a top rope a few thousand times. Eventually your knees are going to feel it by the time you're, 60, 70 years old. So the Cauliflower Alley Club was put together to try and help a lot of these guys. So I met Brian and I did a Killer Bees issue series, actually, a 3-issue series with Brian and Jim Brunzell. And Brian was a gold mine. Brian started introducing me to guys left and right. From there, I met and did a series or a book for Rocky Johnson, Gangrel, the Rock and Roll Express, Jake Hager, a couple of the girls from Glow, if you remember Glow Wrestling back in the day. And then Brian introduced me to his good friend Terry Funk, and which was a huge one for me because if people ask me who's your favorite wrestler of all time, it's Terry Funk. I mean, I was a guy who liked that old redneck wrestler when they come down to the ring, whether it be Terry Funk or Blackjack Mulligan or Dusty Rhodes. That was my thing. I like that rough and tumble. They didn't have to have a ripped physique, but they were just, tough old cowboys. And that's how I ended up where I am today with Terry.
So let's even go into this because obviously, Terry Funk, everybody knows who Terry Funk is. Whether I'm 29, and I came into wrestling when I was in high school. I was a 9th grader in high school. I came in right in during John Cena Edge's feud at Unforgiven. Yes. But I then went a little bit backwards because I know that Edge was teaming up with Mick Foley, dealing and fighting with, Tommy Dreamer and Terry Funk of all people. On Terry Funk set the thing on fire. Is brilliant. I think it was at One Night Stand. I think 2005 One Night Stand. It was great. But the entire thing is that everybody knows who Terry Funk is. So what was that like before we even dive into the story and what it's dealing with? What was that like as a fan? Because very few people, people can go to a convention and meet Terry Funk. But very few people get to spend time with Terry Funk and get to say, "Hey, I'm going to be writing your story, but I'm also a huge fan of you." It's a weird thing. I don't know how to explain it any other way.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I've learned this with a lot of the wrestlers, and Terry probably in particular. He is one of the nicest men you will ever meet. I'll get calls from him, at least once a week. I pick up the phone. I'll be at work or at home. Hey, Crowther, what you doing? How's the comic book? He's hysterical. He just and he's always got me laughing. The other day, I actually, because I'm not only am I his friend, but I'm still a massive fan. So I was scrolling around looking for old Terry Funk podcast that he'd done, and I found one he did with Jerry Lawler, and he first thing he says when he pops on Lawler's show is, "You stink, Lawler." I mean, the guy is in character, like 99% of the time, and he will have you rolling. And honestly, it's been a blessing being able to know him and to be, know that he considers me a friend as well, which is it's an honor. I never would have thought it as a kid growing up here in Florida and watching Terry call Ric Flair a banana nose and all these different things. I never would have thought that eventually I'd call him a friend, but I'm proud to today.
Yeah, and to even go into this, because obviously the comic is his story. It's the highlights that he thinks is important. It's a little bit of background. And one of the things, and obviously, I'm an interviewer and I interview a lot of people. This book is very much driven out of primary sources.
Yeah,
where I think it's safe to say that 95 to plus is driven out of, primary sources with potentially a little bit of story pushing along, just because you're putting it into a comic. But
yeah, you have to add a little dialogue here and there, but it's very much Terry's story, Terry's life.
And so what is this like? Because a lot of this stuff was gathered in first person, which is the conversations that you had with Terry that were recorded, and then you're getting also a feel of his tonality. And that's what makes this book different than somebody saying, "Hey, I'm just telling a biography of said person." Absolutely. And so what is that like? Because it does change it in a lot of ways, I feel, because this almost reads and feels like, hey, he's telling the story.
Yeah. And honestly, Terry's hasn't been out yet, so not too many people have seen unless beyond what they can see on the Kickstarter itself right now. But one of the biggest compliments I got, I want to say it was coming off of Nikolai's book, is one of the reviewers came back and said, "I can tell this is written by a fan of wrestling. And that's why I love this book. It doesn't feel like it's written by a comic book writer. It doesn't feel like it's written by a biographer. It feels like it's written by a fan of wrestling, someone who really knows."
Let's even talk about that. Yeah. That's crucial, I think, because this is one of the things that I think is a big problem. And I don't know if you are a podcaster the same way I am, but when I'm interviewing people, and there's certain animes I know, there's certain things I just know about, and there's certain things I don't know as much about. But obviously, I know a lot about comics. And I've been on shows and I've watched shows where you can tell somebody's interviewing the person because they were told to interview them, but they don't know anything about them. And I've been on that, on the other end, where I'm talking about money and I'm talking about finance with somebody, and they know nothing about what I'm talking about. And it's like, why am I here? And that's something that I think is crucial, where if you're writing a wrestling book or you're writing in a particular subject, or we could throw something outside of wrestling to get my point across, which is cryptocurrencies, I can tell and I could smell it. And even from what I've seen, and obviously I've read some of the other stuff that I found, and I know some of your work, because obviously I know Amanda Rachel's and I've seen it around. I just didn't know it was you, so my bad on that point. But all jokes aside, I can tell when somebody knows the lingo, understands the business. And I think that's something that is extremely crucial. Yeah. And so what is that like for you? Because I think there's a lot of talented writers, but I don't know how many people really know wrestling.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And honestly, it probably helps with the rapport I have with the wrestlers themselves. I mean, subsequently, I ended up joining the Cauliflower Alley Club myself, and have gotten to befriend a lot of these guys. And whenever I do conventions, usually I get messages, "Who you bringing this time, John?" Because whenever I do a convention, I bring one or two pro wrestlers with me. and these are the guys that I hang out with, and I talk the lingo. In fact, I had a German exchange student staying with us last year, and we ended up having him training with, if you remember Alex the Pug Porto, we had him training with the Pug over in Orlando to be himself to do a pro wrestling. So, it's really immersing myself in the business as much as I possibly can. And as a fan growing up, I love it. I mean, I couldn't be happier. I mean, here I am 50 years old living a dream. I never would have imagined, from what started as just writing a comic to help my daughter and to save on tickets to conventions, has turned and blown up into actually finding a genre that I truly love and can write about, and some of the guys and gals that I grew up with. It's just really amazing.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting, and obviously, I mean, I can tell when somebody knows a topic and when they don't, and that's the thing is that and I think it's a problem in comics where I feel like a lot of people right now in comics are writing topics because they're popular, but they don't really know those areas.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not just the writers. I mean, I think it's the artists too, particularly when you're dealing with something like pro wrestling or maybe football, because a lot of our guys were old football players, and we touch on that stuff as well. Even Terry was a pro football player at Southwest Texas with a lot of the guys. So your artists have to know how to draw that kind of action. I mean, you can drawing a Superman flying through the sky and a guy putting somebody in a full Nelson or a hammerlock or something like, you got a spinning toe hold. You got to know how to draw that. It's not just any artist can sit down and actually put that on paper where it's looking like it should look.
Yeah, it's one of the things where I think WWE has hit it very well with Boom.
Yeah.
And if you look at what they've done with Boom in those comics, that actually looks like a wrestling book.
Absolutely.
And it also looks like the likeness. And that's the other thing too with a lot of this stuff that I feel is that if you're going to write something, you have to understand the likeness of it. And you have to get that, hey, these people look a certain way and you have to hit it on the nail. You don't have the flexibility where Superman has gone through a bunch of reiterations. So if you're writing 1950 Superman, it doesn't have to look like 2020 Superman.
But Terry Funk is Terry Funk. Now, the thing about Terry, which made his interesting, is, for people out there who aren't necessarily very familiar with Terry, he really, over his time in wrestling, which exceeds 50 years, he's really had several careers when you think about it. I mean, when he came into the business with his dad, he was not a hardcore wrestler.
We're going to talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, he really changed. And one of the things that I've done with him in particular, but also with some of the others, is, like you said, getting a likeness on a wrestler is very important. So what I do I do a lot of independent research, trying to find old photos, old videos, anything that the guys or their families can give me. We grab all of that stuff. I send huge files of that to my artists. So that they know by date, by time period, this is what he looked like. This was his hairstyle. Did he have a mustache? Did he have a beard? One of our books that I worked on was for Lanny Poffo. A lot of people don't probably remember Lanny Poffo actually had an afro at one stage of his career. But you see those changes, their physical transformations in the books as well, which I think is important for people who remember them and remember the different periods of time that they were performing.
Yeah, and let's even dive into this because obviously this book covers a lot of stuff in a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's 24, maybe 26 pages at the most.
Yeah, well, this is not going to be the complete. We've got enough for it's going to be 2 books. So this will get you about halfway through Terry's career.
But even still, with that,
it's
getting to the halfway point. I mean, 48 pages, 50 pages is not a lot of pages.
No. I remember when Kevin, our publisher at Squared Circle, I said, because we had been initially we were doing a lot of these books as 3-issue series, which I think worked. For instance, with like the Killer Bees and the Rock and Roll Express, when you're dealing with really 3 different careers. Like, for instance, with the Rock and Roll Express, you got, Ricky Morton's career leading up to the Rock and Roll Express. And then you had Robert Gibson leading up to the Rock and Roll Express, because Robert was part of one hell of a good tag team himself with his brother Ricky Gibson, before the Rock and Roll Express was ever created. And Ricky Morton was a hell of a singles wrestler leading up to that point. And then we would have a third book that would deal with the Rock and Roll Express. So we were kind of going on a platform like that. And then Kevin and I talked, and we said, well, should we do these as one shots like we did with Rocky Johnson and Lanny Poffo? And we kind of thought maybe that was a better route for some of the singles wrestlers, until we looked at Terry Funk. And Terry Funk had such a career. There is no way. I mean, you would have to do, basically it'd be a graphic novel to try and get his book into a single issue. Just way too much involved, too many different.
Isn't it also the idea that, I mean, AEW just did a whole graphic novel. I think, what was it, Dirk Manning, I want to say, worked on it. The book did great, but it's also the idea that a lot of capital had to be pumped into it. There was also very much a lot of marketing had to be pumped into it. Yes. And it was a graphic novel. And I have that book. It's a cool book. I'm happy that I have it. And it was well worth it. I think it's a great, great book to have if you're a wrestling fan. But at the same time, I also think that there is something to be said about, hey, keeping something tight, keeping something short, keeping something to a one shot, because, you know, I don't feel like reading, you know, sometimes 120, 140 pages of somebody's career from start to finish. Nor do I feel like having another book in my shelf per se.
Right.
Or even having another file on my computer, because there gets to a point where it's just like, okay, cool. I want something that I could read in 20 minutes.
Yeah. And that's kind of how comics were for me as a kid. I mean, it was a pick up, quick, exciting, action-filled read. And that's what we try and give people with these. And if you've done some of the research, you probably noted that what we've done also through Squared Circle is, after we do a series of books, we compile them into what we call the Comic Book Encyclopedia of Pro Wrestling. So we've done 2 volumes of that so far as well, which is kind of a nice collection of the books as we go along. I think the first one had 10 of these single issues that we did. The second one had 9. And then Kevin Laporte, again, with Squared Circle or with Inverse, he writes a lot of like encyclopedia type entries of different wrestlers that serve as buffers between the different stories, which is a nice little ad, nice little collection for people.
And so to even go further into this, because I can show some pages, and so we got that right there. We obviously have this right here of you know, Terry Funk doing some fun stuff. This is some more stuff, and obviously, you know, kind of chasing the gold to some degree. And then we got that, and then his entire thing going back to 1954, guys.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's his dad. His dad was a big fan of kayfabe. He grew up on kayfabe.
And so what is this like? Because obviously you are exploring the early side of things, and I don't know about you, but as an interviewer, I love going through people's training, and I love going into people getting stretched out and you know, getting chopped to death, for lack of a better word. And I love it. And I mean, I love, you know, the Midwest as a wrestling hub. So I love places, and I love people like Gary J and Warhorse, and there's a few other people who have been around forever. And I'm not saying their training is exactly politically correct today. I'm not saying that at all. But I really like knowing what made people tick and what inspired people. And that's one of the things that's kind of cool about your book. And
you'll get that in this. I mean, you know, Terry's first introduction to a death match was an Iron Man match, really, between his dad and Mike DiBiase. I forget how many hours that match went. They talk about a Broadway going an hour. I think this one went close to 3 hours of just complete blood and mayhem in the ring there in Texas. And Terry saw that as a kid. You know, some of the stuff that these guys went through. I mean, talking to Brian Blair, training with Hiro Matsuda. Hiro would. I remember one point Brian said Hiro told him, "You know, I'm not training you guys to handle a guy in the ring. I'm trying to train you guys to handle getting from the ring to the dressing room, because the guys in the ring are going to protect you. The fans are the ones who want to kick your ass." So, you know, they would teach these wrestlers
about that too, because this is where wrestling gets crazy. Absolutely. I mean, there have been events where like the fans have thrown popcorn. There's been events where, people are trying to stab you. I
Oh,
mean, where there's all this crazy shit in wrestling.
yeah.
And I mean, I don't know if you've seen it, and I don't know if you have Peacock, but I just watched Evil on WWE. And when you're talking about Hulk Hogan,
Hmm.
NWA Hollywood Hulk Hogan, it's crazy when you're talking about, Ric Flair and him being a heel back like in the 80s and going into the 90s. I mean, this is insane. And it's like people are wanting to jump the guardrail and stab these people, and people are wanting to do horrible things to them. And it's awesome. It
Yeah, you
really
want to get
is.
you want to get beyond. Yeah, it's a little bit beyond the Terry Funk book, and I kind of mentioned it to you before we went on the air. Another Kickstarter, me personally, I'm running. These other two are being run by publishers for me, but I've got a 350-page book coming out next month, prose biography. It's not a comic, on the Bushwhackers. And for people who are fans of the Bushwhackers and their history, if you're a history fan, they weren't always the Bushwhackers. They weren't always the big licking your head, hugging each other type of guy. They were the sheep herders. And before they were the sheep herders, they were the New Zealand Kiwis. And they were hardcore before hardcore. I'm talking blood. I'm talking barbed wire. I'm talking exploding matches. I'm talking going to Puerto Rico and having to fight their way to and from the ring, Luke getting his teeth punched out. I mean, it was insane stuff, because you got to remember, back in those days, back in the 70s, back in the 80s, and before that time, not to date myself, but times when I was growing up, kayfabe was real. And, they'd walk into an arena, and a lot of times the security, the cops didn't even know it was a work. And these guys there was a story with Butch and Luke. God, where was this at? It was up in, I think it was up in the Carolinas, if I'm correct. I may be off on it. The story will be in the book, but up in the Carolinas, one of those areas, and they started a riot. They went out into the crowd and started fighting in the crowd, and it erupted, and they ended up, all of them got arrested. It was Luke, Butch, Manny Fernandez, and I forget who Manny's tag team partner was, but they all got arrested and thrown in jail. And they had to keep kayfabe in the prison. So, they were kept in different cells. And of course, they were yelling, "I'll kick your ass," across the cells. And because they knew if they broke kayfabe, they'd lose their jobs. You had to protect the business. And that's how it was back then. And Terry grew up during that time, during the 70s and 80s.
It's very interesting, because obviously when we talk about this and we go back into wrestling history, I mean, we're talking 50 years of somebody's career. It's not like, and I'm young in the wrestling game. I mean, I came in when I was like 15. So
Yeah.
I've only had 14 years of wrestling experience. And obviously I've seen, and I've gone back, watched WCW. I've seen stuff from the 80s. But like, even still, it's crazy, because I understand the history of
Yeah.
that. And I also think that people don't understand that, Terry Funk was, a very, very, technical wrestler. And
Mm-hmm.
then he became that hardcore guy. And then he became, ECW. And he's sort of like the godfather to some degree of hardcore wrestling. And
Absolutely.
he didn't invent deathmatch wrestling. That's always been around, but he almost
Yeah.
made it where he's associated with it to like the T.
Yeah.
So
And a lot of people don't realize Terry Funk, Dory Funk, another one in particular, Stan Hansen. These guys had massive careers in Japan. So much of the material that they produced and that they did overseas, I'd say 90% of wrestling fans in the States have never seen it. But they were huge in Japan. One of his big retirement, probably the biggest retirement ceremony ever held for Terry Funk, was in Japan. Because he was such a folk hero and wrestling hero to those people over there. Wrestling is massive. And a lot of people here don't realize how big it is with New Japan Pro Wrestling and All Japan Pro Wrestling. There's a lot of history there too. And
there's somebody I interviewed, Ronnie Nicole, and Ronnie, I think, is one of the top, or spent the most amount of time as an American in Japan, and it's crazy.
yeah,
And like, I think she practically lived in Japan for almost like 18 months.
yeah,
Almost like exclusively. She maybe came back for the States for like 2 weeks, and then she went right back, which is crazy. And so like, I think she spent the most almost continuous time as
Yeah.
what is known as gaijin, for
Yeah.
lack of a better word, in Japan. But it's a very different animal there,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's fascinating. And that's what's so interesting about
And
Japan.
another big one over there was Vader. I mean, Japan made Vader. I mean, they basically created Big Van Vader. And a lot of these guys could make more money in Japan than they'd ever make in the States, you know? And
Didn't Lesnar make a bunch of money in Japan?
what's that?
Didn't Brock Lesnar like go to Japan for a while and made a decent amount of money?
Absolutely. They could build a whole career. They didn't need the United States. You know, of course, you know, for a lot of people, the WWF has always been, at least, you know, since the mid 80s, the preeminent organization to be a part of in the United States, you know, to get the television and to get the, you know, the product deals and things like that. But
It still is in a lot of ways. It
yeah,
still is in a lot of ways. People, and we can go into this if you want, but my take is I think AEW is a good company. I like
right.
AEW. I don't think AEW, I think AEW, there's room for AEW, but they are not WWE. WWE is a different animal.
Oh, I agree. I agree. And talking to guys who are, you know, have been in both, actually, you can tell that they are not the same animal as WWF. Will they ever become that? Who knows? You know, I think that wrestling, at least me personally, wrestling is at a much different stage from when I was had my biggest fandom. I mean, I grew up in a time before the internet, before cable TV.
Let me ask you a question because
Yeah.
I'm curious about this. I'm a huge fan of IWTV.
Yeah.
IWTV is independent wrestling television.
Okay.
For those who don't know about it, they stream about 200 events live a year. It's $10 a month.
Oh, wow.
And people who have been in WWE have come out of IWTV. People who are in AEW have come out of places like Beyond, which streams on IWTV. Things like St. Louis Anarchy. There's a bunch of other companies like Prestige and a variety of other companies that are really, really amazing wrestling companies that have done fascinating things. So, you know, for me, I'm a huge independent wrestling fan because it is more accessible than it's ever been before. And I watch very little of AEW and WWE because I think a company like Beyond or World Wrestling Open or even Game Changing Wrestling, they put on just the same quality matches, if not better.
Yeah.
And they do it cheaper in a lot of ways for me as a consumer.
Yeah. I'm actually a big fan of NWA Power, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I don't watch a lot of WWE now. I don't watch a lot of AEW. I do go back and watch a lot of the old stuff from when I was growing up. I enjoy it. I mean, I liked being a kid. I don't think people now can actually experience it the way people my generation did, where we would watch a territorial wrestling match and we would learn about guys from other territories through wrestling magazines. You know, I would sit down. I remember I had a good friend. He lived in Massachusetts, and we would sit down and we would actually get on the phone. These were dial phones, and we would talk about the wrestlers I had here, the wrestlers he had there, who we thought could beat who, and then we'd read about it in the magazines. And then, you know, eventually after several months, some of your guys would leave, some other guys would come in. It was always transitioning, but we didn't have internet. We didn't have you know, cable TV where you could follow what everybody was doing. I mean, they'd be a heel, you know, on the television set, and then nowadays you see them on Facebook, you know, having laughs and joking with the guy that they're supposed to be, you know, dire enemies with. We didn't have that. It was easier to keep kayfabe. It was easier, for me at least, to you know, get yourself really involved in the event and truly believe what you were seeing. I remember a great story I had. Growing up as a kid, I think I was about 11 or 12 years old, growing up here in Central Florida. And I've had a discussion with this guy recently. We actually did a show together. My dad was the attorney for Kevin Sullivan. And this is when
I know.
Kevin was.
I know who that is. I know exactly.
Kevin lived in South Daytona. At the time, he was married to Nancy, and that became Nancy Benoit. Nancy was from my high school, actually, here in DeLand. And I was about, like I said, I was about 11 or 12 years old. I came to my dad's office. My dad was an attorney. Again, as I said, I came to the office. I'm sitting there doing my homework. I look up, and in walks the freaking devil with his sidekick Angel. And I was like, you know? So he goes into my dad's office. I go over. There was a little kind of like a little above a door window. And I pulled up a chair and I'm standing on it trying to watch him. And my mom was my dad's office manager. And she's like, "What are you doing, honey? Your dad's with a client." And I'm like, "Mom, that's the devil." and of course, my mom knew I was a wrestling fan. So, she's not going to ruin wrestling. She says, "Well, I don't think he's going to." I think I told her that he threw fireballs at people on TV. And she assured me Dad wasn't going to catch a fireball in the face. And I kind of relaxed. And then subsequently, I ended up, seeing Kevin at local Steak and Shakes, at the Japanese restaurant we used to go to. But I had this discussion with him, and he actually did remember it. He goes, "I remember you. You were the big-eared kid with the freckles, But that's how it was. I mean, you truly believe that.
To even talk about this, because obviously, I mean, this book sort of explores parts of that, I think, as well, where it doesn't, obviously dive into, the fans' reactions, but when you're documenting somebody's career, and then you're going from one age into the next age, and I don't know how you view ages, but I view every 10 years as a generation.
Yeah.
And so obviously when somebody has a 50-year career, they have gone through 4 or 5 or 6 generations.
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, Terry Funk's career going from the 80s, breaking into the business, his pursuit into the NWA Heavyweight Championship, going through into ECW, and then winding up ending his career in WWE, and then obviously going even further, obviously going through Japan.
And beyond that, not to interrupt you, but beyond that, his movie career. I mean, if for those of you who remember Roadhouse, I mean, he was a badass bouncer in Roadhouse. He had quite a good movie career before any of these wrestlers.
I'm sorry, I was distracted in Roadhouse because that Patrick is just a very, very, very attractive man. I enjoy Roadhouse. The scene where he's like, "Be cool." I just love that scene in so many ways.
Yeah.
It's a funny scene, but it's not a funny scene.
And
escort him out.
Well, how PG is your show?
Oh, my show's not PG.
Okay, good. So I'm going to tell you a Terry Funk story that's not in the comic. So Terry and I were talking about his movie career. And he said it hit a hiccup at one point because he pissed off one of the movie producers. And, Terry, just like most wrestlers, a lot of them are ribbers, right? So Terry's at this, they're all drinking beers and they're at a bar. And Terry tells the guy he's going to do a test. This is a test of your balance. And he tells the guy to close his eyes. And he says, if you can pass this test, you can fly an airplane. So he tells the guy to close his eyes and stick his finger out like this, okay? And then they're going to spin him around, and then he has to be able to walk, and he has to be able to touch a spot on the wall. And he's pointed out the spot on the wall. So they got the guy drinks his beers, they spin him around, they blindfold him. Terry drops his pants, bends over, and spreads his cheeks. They walk the guy forward, and he sticks his finger right up Terry's ass. And he said everybody lost it. And he said he didn't get called back for a movie for about 10 years after that. And he thought it was hysterical. Everybody thought it was hysterical, but not that producer. So that one didn't make the comic, though.
See, that's the fun stuff, though, which I love when people do things to each other.
Yeah, we do have some ribs in there. We got some ribs with Terry Funk and Dick Murdoch. Where Dick Murdoch, they were doing some drinking, and Dick wanted him to push him around in a shopping cart. So Terry tucks him up on a hill and just lets the shopping cart go with Dick Murdoch in it. Another one with Rick Martel, where they told Rick to take his clothes off and run around the car. So Rick strips down as he goes to run around the car. They hit the gas, and Rick's chasing the car. And this made the comic. Rick's chasing the car as every time he'd get within about 2 feet to get in, they'd hit the gas again.
It's terrible. It's just terrible.
But that's not stuff guys could get away with nowadays.
I mean, it's clearly changed in which that
Yeah.
obviously WWE has changed. Things have evolved. Obviously, corporate companies have done things. Also, I mean, the
Yeah.
culture has changed dramatically,
Yeah.
and also I think there's been too many incidents in wrestling. I mean,
Absolutely.
not to do something, but I wound up in a bad. I actually wound up in like two bad deals in wrestling.
Okay.
Um, One of them was a season ticket thing where the company went defunct and I'm owed money from them for
Yeah.
about 4 shows or 5 shows that I'm never going to see my money again. Another one was COVID, and then brown paper tickets went out, and they're probably going to get sued to death because they screwed a lot of people, not just wrestling.
Yeah.
And then Nova was a disaster because all these promoters, you got female talent, and if you don't know how to handle your female talent, and you started texting them inappropriately, your
Right.
company's going to go under pretty damn quickly.
Right.
Um, and so, I was a sponsor with Nova, and then that thing went to shit. And it was just, it wasn't the money, it was the dishonesty
Right.
that they didn't say, hey, we screwed up and we're going out of business. And if they told me that, you know what would have happened? I'm sure we could have had an arrangement where, certain things needed to be addressed, and it was problematic. Um, but I digress right there. But yeah, it's unfortunate because I think that wrestling needs people to make jokes.
Yeah.
You're in a position where a bunch of people are showing a lot of skin,
Mhm.
and you're touching each other in weird ways, for lack of a better word. If you cannot make a joke in wrestling, I'm sorry.
Well, and
Like,
honestly, at least back in the day, I mean, nowadays, I think there's more opportunities for these guys to spend some time at home and stuff like that. But back in the day, I think Evan Ginsberg released a movie recently, a documentary. It's called 350 Days. These guys, on average, were on the road about 350 days a year with each other, away from their families, traveling around the country. You got to do something to keep yourself amused, and it's just what it was. I mean, guys were having fun. They're going to prank each other. They're going to have drinks here and there. And that was, life. Did they do some things that they probably inappropriate? Absolutely. And that's probably why eventually, I think it's pretty well known, the WWE eventually cracked down on a lot of those pranks and things like that, because some of them got out of hand.
I mean, the shift was the plane ride from hell.
Yeah.
Pretty well documented. The plane ride from hell. I
Yeah.
mean, if you haven't seen that from Dark Side of the Ring, I mean, the plane ride from hell was a disaster. A lot of people crossed the line. A lot of things broke down. The fact that there was a lot of alcohol, and
Yeah.
that, what was it, like 7 carts that they went through, that entire group. You know,
Yeah.
it's pretty intense. And the fact that, like, I think Vince on the plane, or was
I,
Vince not on that plane? I have no idea, but I
yeah,
know
I don't.
JR was on that plane.
Yeah. I've
And
got
that
a place. I've got a crazy plane ride beyond that one in the Bushwhackers book, with Marty Jannetty and the Ultimate Warrior, and obviously Luke and Butch were on the plane, and a few other guys, where some pills were dropped and drinks were had and clothes were clipped off and people's heads were shaved by the time the night with the flight was over. It was pretty crazy. So I think a lot of those plane rides were, fairly common. Some of that stuff that was happening. Another one that happened with a businessman and on an airplane, where he gave a couple of the wrestlers some grief, and when he got to the bathroom, they took a shit in his shoes, you know, and then dropped some pills in his drink to knock him out. By the time he arrived in London, slipped his shoes on, he had turds squeezing through his toes. I mean, that was just the kind of stuff that happened.
It's so messed up in so many ways. I don't think that people can get away with that now.
No, not nowadays. Not nowadays.
That's kind of crazy. But obviously, I do want to go through some rewards here,
Yeah.
because obviously there's a lot of stuff, and it's covering his entire career, or at least the first half, and then there's going to be a sequel that's
Yep.
coming out. And one of the cool things that's actually really interesting is that, obviously, I think this is just the standard
Yes.
edition and the
Yep.
championship cover.
Yep.
I know there were 10 that had gold foil on it, and they sold out.
Yeah, and then I think Kevin expanded it and brought us a few more. This particular, the championship cover is done by an artist named Randolph Dixon. He's done a few of the covers for us. Another guy, I think he's based out of Alabama too. He's very close with Amanda and Kevin. Really good artist.
And then there's this one that's really cool, which is, the Full Metal, and obviously metal covers are really cool. And
absolutely,
so that's kind of cool. And Funk You, which
John Bickness did those, and Terry actually signed about 20 of those for us that we made.
So that's cool right there in that realm. And so obviously that's out there. And then it's interesting too, because one of the things is that I know there's regular editions and then there's autograph editions.
Yes.
And I know that stuff is split between stuff on the Kickstarter, which I think a bunch of it might have already sold out, the autograph side, but then there's the add-ons, and I don't know if those things have sold out yet either. But obviously, what was this like? Because some people say, hey, look, I just want to read the story, and I think your cover's like $8, which isn't.
We make it try and make it very reasonable for people.
Because I was going to ask about that too, and then the metal is $35, which I also think is relatively reasonable. And one of the things that bothers me, and I don't know if it bothers you, and there's a few people on Indiegogo that are charging $25 for a cover A. And I understand $10, I understand $15, but 25, and maybe it's my view where I come from the world of Zenescope, where they'll do a 250 print run for $25. So now you're charging me $25 on Zenescope that has a 17-year track record of being the Bad Girl Art Company. And you're charging their prices. Like, it doesn't make sense to me.
I agree with you 100%.
I can't justify it. And so, like, that's something that I'm very curious about, where it gets upsetting to me. And I'm like, you gotta be reasonable with me. Like, I think $10 on an indie project is reasonable, because I get that you're not printing in mass quantities per se, and that you need to fund your project. But when you go into like the $20 for a cover A, I'm out. So
honestly, we've always taken the approach. We want people to read the books. Obviously you got to factor in the cost of printing. The cost of of course the shipping. We pick that up, but we try and set that as close as possible. You try and factor in the fees that Kickstarter is going to charge. We, for the most part, honestly, we do a lot of these books gratis. So our artists are getting paid out of what extra comes out of the Kickstarter. I personally don't take anything from the Kickstarter. We try to give 100 copies or so to each of the wrestlers, so they have books that they can distribute to their fans and things like that. So it's not like we're trying to break the bank on these. We're trying to tell these stories. We're fans of wrestling. We want people to know the stories of their favorite wrestlers. We want the wrestlers to get something out of it. And that's kind of the end.
Let me ask you a question, because one of the things is that obviously I ran a Kickstarter for this show, and the way I make my real money, and the way I think I'm going to make my real money in the long run, is I'm going to be doing this for at least another year, if not another 20 years. And there's a million ways I can make money. I can sell advertising on all the backlog. I can go license out the podcast. I can go build out my entire, library, and I'm just getting more and more followers. The YouTube side's growing, and I have sponsors sometimes. And so the way that and then the Kickstarter just subsidizes some of that. And I feel that with comics, there's multiple means to make money, where a lot of people say, hey, look, I'm just trying to get my money as a seed round, just to cover part of my art, part of my printing, or I have $6,000, and if I raise $9,000, then the next issue gets funded, and then the printing gets covered. And so I'm not looking to make money. I'm looking to figure out a way how to pick up merchandise and get it out there. And I think that's the thing. And then people make money on what also is graphic novels and things of that nature on the back end. So
so we generally, if we're going to make anything off of these, it's usually coming back with our collected editions, our encyclopedia, our comic book encyclopedias. We put out 2 so far. I think the first one collected about 10 issues. The second one collected 9. But any excess that we make on the Kickstarters, a portion goes to the wrestlers, which I think is important. Some of our wrestlers that have passed away, a little bit of the portion that comes out of that goes to their spouses, which I think is important because we are trying to give back to the wrestling. A portion goes to the artist, and some goes back to the publisher to cover some of their expenses. If I'm making anything on these, honestly, where I make most of it is if I'm selling some at a convention, I'll make some money off my comps. And honestly, what I get the most out of it is hanging out with the wrestlers. I enjoy it.
And also, isn't it your brand too? Because that's the other thing too, where when I'm interviewing a wrestler, I'm interviewing a voice actor.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily getting money, but I also get credibility.
Absolutely.
I get people say, "Hey, you got to interview so and so," and it's very, very influential. When all of a sudden you're like, "Oh man, I interviewed Mickey Knuckles is a great name to drop," and so that's kind of, and then all of a sudden I want to interview somebody else. And I drop, oh, I interviewed Mickey Knuckles, they're going to take my phone call. And now I have credibility. And also, the reason why I felt comfortable running my Kickstarter, I'm very honest, is I'm like, look, if you've looked at the last 9 years who's been on my show and who gets on my show, there's a reason why I didn't ask money for the first 9 years because I didn't have the horses. And now I feel like, hey, look, you don't know that Mickey Knuckles might be on my show. Lufisto might be on my show. A guy like Warhorse might be on my show. A guy like Ebass might be on my show. And then all of a sudden you're next to that person. I mean, Roland was the person who was before Roland on my show was the original voice actress of Nurse Joy.
Right.
So that was yesterday. So that's a big deal in a lot of ways. And so I think that's the other thing a lot of people need to realize is your name means something and your name is worth money. And you're now associated with Terry Funk.
Oh, absolutely. And that's built itself even with the books themselves. As I mentioned, once I did a book for Nikolai and of course that brought on Bruno because, Nikolai was a protege of Bruno's. And once I worked with Bruno, you see it there. Eventually I was working with the Killer Bees and Rocky Johnson, and it just kind of builds on itself. And it happens in comics. I mean, I think from doing this, it led me to what was my holy grail of comics. I got to work with Heavy Metal Magazine a year or so ago, and this stuff it kind of builds. Once you build a reputation of getting things done and doing quality work, it carries on. But again, I'm also a firm believer, as I mentioned to you before, my day job, I'm an attorney, and you learn that it takes a lifetime to build a reputation. It takes about 5 seconds to tear it down. So you always have.
So easy to tear it down, and I mean, look, you know what it is? If you act like an asshole, it's going to be known, and it doesn't. And to rebuild your career is so hard. It is so hard, and you know what it is? I'm well aware of that. It's one of the things that I try to pride myself on. It's a reason why you don't see me going out attacking people, doing stupid shit in the comic world. So a bunch of people do it, and it's a real problem.
Right. And honestly, even with our wrestling comics, one of the things I told the guys going into it, and of course they all were in agreement, we don't do any negativity in comics. You may, not necessarily with Terry, but I'll use Bruno as the example. There were always the stories of Bruno's problems with maybe Vince and things like that. There's no room for that in our comics. I'm not there to stir controversy. I'm not there to hit bad stories or say negative things about people or anything like that. Who wants to read that honestly in a comic book? For me, comic books are about fun. They're about, and I'm a history major. So with wrestling, at least it's about history. It's not about trying to, denigrate people or do anything like that. It's about trying to tell someone's life story and make it enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, on this show, we call things out what they are. The goal is that I'm not going to go beat up a creator unless they brought a fight to my doorstep, and people have, and they've learned a very valuable lesson where if you bring a fight right to my doorstep and then ring the doorbell, expect to be punched in the face is all I'm going to say. But if you don't bring the fight to my doorstep, I don't want anything to do with you, and you can do your comic, I'll do my stuff, and I'm happy because I'm not the guy that says I think everybody can win in comics. I really do.
Absolutely.
I think you have a good product, and if you have a book that I'm not a fan of, I'm not going to interfere. I have no desire to interfere. I have no desire to bring up controversy But bring it to my doorstep. It's nothing personal, but you brought it to my doorstep.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. I've never understood. I mean, I do see, doing wrestling comics, it kind of leaves me more on a periphery with the overall comic scene because it's a little different than a lot of the stuff that's out there. But I've never understood the competition or the headbutting in comics, and that it's a tough industry as it is.
So this is my take on it. My take is that people say, "Hey, my book and your book look similar,"
Yeah.
or "I have an issue with the way you've done something, and I can put you down and steal $3,000 from your audience and put it into mine." And also, it's the idea that people say, "Hey, look, this is my livelihood," and that there is a finite amount of money. And look, I get it. Where look, I buy and sell comics on eBay. I do it, and I get that if somebody's buying from me, they're not buying from somebody else. And look, people have attacked me and they say, "Oh, you're expensive." I'm like, okay, that's fine. If you could find it cheaper, be my guest.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna be here and I'm gonna be long in this book. And when you can't find it anywhere else for $60, I'll still sell it to you for the price that you're upset about, which is
Right.
$60, it might be worth 65.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what it comes down to. And I think what people have to realize is that, I don't back a lot of people's Kickstarters right now. And there are people that I won't back their Kickstarter. And I like their covers per se. But, and I'm very honest, where I don't like them in particular as a human being.
Right.
And I don't like their attitude. I don't like their mentality.
And that's your right as a consumer. Absolutely.
And so I've actually spoken with somebody, a woman named Lori, who was on my show, and we were talking about it. I said, look, as a person now, when I'm backing people's Kickstarters, I look at how you've interacted with your fans. I look at how you've interacted with your artists, your writers, the people you're working with, your editor. I look at how you interact with the community, because it all matters. Because guess what? There is 30 amazing projects that are all A+ projects on Kickstarter right now that everybody should back. But you cannot back all 30 of them. You might be able to back 5 of them if you're in a good enough position. So now you have their differentiating factors to say, okay, I now need to create a scorecard, and what 5 am I backing? And it could be that, hey, I know person A, B, C, and D, and E, and that's why I'm backing them. Or this person is controversial. I don't want to be near them.
Yep. I agree with you 100%. 100%.
That Roland man, he's one controversial guy.
He's probably, honestly, one of the nicest guys in comics. I remember meeting Roland for the first time at Daytona Beach Comic Con, which is run by also one of the nicest guys, if you've never met, Tom Raup. He runs the Daytona Con. He runs one up in Jacksonville. He runs one in DeLand. Just a really nice guy. And he found out about my first comic, called me up and offered me my first table for free, just because he's trying to help out guys in comics. But that's how I met Roland too. And
I wish there was people like that in the anime world, in the comic world. Like up here in Connecticut, up in DC, like all these major cons. Like I'm a podcast, and I would reach out. I'm like, hey, could you help me out? And they don't give a damn, and it's so discouraging. Like it's weird, and like people say, oh, like I reached out to certain people, and like, oh, that guy's the nicest guy, and I'm like, I reached out, he didn't do jack shit for me. So what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like I have a very different opinion where it's like, and I was a panelist. I'm like, hey, can you help me out here? Like, can you help out, somebody who's doing, work? And like after 50 panels, it was just like, I gave up. And then other stuff happened. And then, it is, I open up my mouth, which is not necessarily the political thing, but when I find an injustice has been committed, I'm not one to take it on the cheek so nicely.
Right. Right.
That's why me and Roland had to get him back on, because an injustice was committed. He wasn't there enough times. No.
No, Roland is awesome, honestly, and his wife BJ is another doll. And actually,
I don't know his wife. Roland, I enjoy Roland because Roland shows up on time.
Yeah. Well, that's Roland. Yeah, that is Roland. And I'd be remiss. I know we're probably running a little shorter on time. We've talked
we have all the time in the world. We have all the time.
I definitely don't want to completely talk about the Funk book when I do have something with Roland.
Yes, we can talk about that too. But I do need to show this really quickly because
Yeah.
I don't know if these are still around. And I'm a huge trading card guy.
Yeah, me too.
I like collecting. I actually unbox stuff. I just bought some WWE Panini Prism cards that are super cool. And I actually pulled the Revolution 01 of Roderick Strong.
Oh, nice.
2022 Revolution Panini.
Yeah.
I pulled the #1 card for out of Newberry Comics of all places. So super cool thing. I unbox a lot of cards. I sell cards on eBay too. I'm looking for an Alexa Bliss. So if somebody's got an Alexa Bliss,
I probably got about 2,000 signed trading cards that I've collected over the years. I just slide them in the slot and stick them on the shelf.
I'm looking for an Alexa Bliss. I have signed Alexa Bliss comics that are graded, that are authenticated. And I love her as a wrestler. I have a 4 Women Horsemen comic that's signed.
Oh, that's
from
fantastic.
San Diego Comic-Con. I don't even think Boom has one in their archives.
Wow.
I think there's maybe like 30 of them on the CGC consensus.
Yeah.
I got it for a steal. It's like a $900 book now. I got it way less. I actually have it. It's this book. For those who are interested, it's this book right here. Signed by the Charlotte, Sasha, Nikki, Brie, Becky, and Bailey. 9.8. All 6 signatures are authenticated. And the story behind that book is you had to buy the book. You were entered into a lottery sponsored by Mattel. Okay. And then all 6 women signed it for free because they were all together at San Diego Comic-Con, because that was a cover done by a woman to basically start the women's revolution.
Oh, fantastic.
And so apparently there's only a few of those books out there because it can be replicated, no question about it. It's just a matter to replicate it is going to be a pain in the ass.
Yeah. Especially with Sasha with AEW now.
Yes, and it's crazy, and it can be replicated. I mean, it's not that hard to replicate it technically, but it's a pain in the ass to replicate.
It'd be a lot of work, and it wouldn't be free. They wouldn't sign it for free. I can tell you that.
Yeah, they wouldn't sign it for free, and it's going to be expensive. And all I know is that I bought mine for $250. Best $250 I ever spent. People thought I was crazy when I was buying it. I'm like, this is money, everybody.
Absolutely.
But enough about wrestling. I do want to talk about Silverline, because you got Teen Beetle, which is somewhat related to Blue Beetle, apparently.
Yeah, and I can explain that a little bit too. My artist on that, again, is Del Barris. Del worked with me on the Rochelle book. He worked with me on the Killer Bees comic and the Nikolai comic and the Rocky Johnson comic. But more importantly, the reason we did Teen Beetle is Del did a lot of the covers for DC Comics, Blue Beetle. So, I kind of had this idea, because for people who don't know, Blue Beetle is part of the public domain.
Yeah, but parts of it are.
Parts of it are, yeah. So I didn't really want to do a Blue Beetle, but I kind of wanted to tie back into some of the old Blue Beetle Charlton stories. So I came up with Teen Beetle, which is basically a young man who has stumbled across the formula for vitamin 2X, which was the way that the original Teen Beetle used to transform and gain his powers. So that's what we have with Teen Beetle. It's a young guy who is actually the grandson of one of the Blue Beetle's sidekicks from back in Charlton, known as Sparky. So this is Sparky's grandson, who finds the Blue Beetle's formula for vitamin 2X in his grandfather's trunk, and has now recreated it with a character from my old Rochelle series named Pure Genius. And now they are kind of a duo of the Teen Beetle and Pure Genius. And this particular 3-issue run that we're doing with Silverline just brings back another old character from the original Blue Beetle called Dr. Mantis, who has come back. He sees the Teen Beetle on television and realizes what he is, and he wants that formula for vitamin 2X. So it's a short little 3-issue run where the Dr. Mantis is in a kind of a struggle with the Teen Beetle and Pure Genius to capture that formula. and will he be able to do it? You have to read the series to find out. Though we've had some really good reviews. This particular Kickstarter that Roland
I read it.
Did you read issue 1?
Roland sent me both.
Oh, super! So I don't know what you think. Hopefully you like it.
So I'll be very honest. I've read issue 2, but I've only half of it's only colored right now.
Okay.
So I mean, I've enjoyed it, everybody, and I'm gonna enjoy it when it's fully colored.
That's
a joke, everybody. That's a joke. But it's enjoyable because what I was speaking with Roland about is that one of the things is that, look, I'm enjoying DC. I'm a huge Teen Titans fan. So anything that DC puts out with the Teen Titans, it's like crack cocaine to me, where it's just, I'm just going to consume it and I love it. Whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, I don't really care because I love the Teen Titans. I love Teen Titans Go. And I'm a 29-year-old man, and I think Teen Titans Go is like arguably one of the best things on television, and was at the time. And you could debate me all you want on that. I don't care. But all jokes aside, there is stuff that's really good in DC, but I'm also getting fed up with all the messaging and all of how it has to be, I guess, this wokeness and everything has to be politically correct. First thing, comics have been political for a long time, but I feel like it's now saying, hey, it used to be sort of laced in a little bit and mixed a little bit deeper, and it wasn't shoved down your throat. And now Batman is saying, if I punch this guy, is there going to be a political crisis? And it's like, punch is political crisis. And I think this is what Teen Beetle doesn't do.
Right. And honestly, I've tried to write the series just like I did with Rochelle before, with the way I used to like to read comics, which is just simple superhero fun. That's all it is. Like you said, I mean, there's always been, a little bit of, you can't say there hasn't been some politics in comics,
and there's nothing wrong with that. It's good that there's politics in comics. Look at, Civil War with New Mutant Island.
Right.
That is the civil rights book.
Even if you go back into the 70s and 80s, they were punching Hitler. I mean, there was, war and politics. It's always been entwined in comics. But I think nowadays, and not to offend anybody, but it almost seems as though the comics today are written by the same guys that are in my age group that were reading the comics back in the 80s. And they just kept reading the comics, but they keep writing them as their mindset has aged. So it's now like 40-year-old guys writing comics for 40-year-old guys, or 50-year-old guys writing comics for 50-year-old guys. They're forgetting to write the comics for the kids, And I've tried to go back. It's initially when I did Rochelle, like I said, I did it for my 13-year-old daughter. And I try to write stories that young people can relate to without having to worry about all this stuff being thrown into it.
Where I disagree is that, so I used to have AT&T shares. I still have my AT&T shares. They spun off into Warner Brothers Discovery. So I view this as an investor, and I view that DC Comics is a profitable company. People say, DC Comics is going bankrupt. I'm not saying that DC Comics is the actual entity of DC Comics. They are in the black. They are not in the red. But I view them as a gigantic IP farm. And so I view it saying, hey, let's toe the line and let's play around and have a fun time with Batman, and let's see what idea we get out of this that's going to be the next billion-dollar movie. And the basis for it, if we do 36 months of comics, we're going to get a movie idea that's going to produce $800 million to $1.2 billion. And it's under Warner Brothers Discovery, and that's how I view it. And there's nothing, it's a good business model for shareholders. It's a good business model for HBO. Don't get me wrong. And those things are important. It's good for merchandising, but it's not good for comics. No. It's not good for comics.
Well, I do think companies are more focused on their movie fandom than they are on the comics themselves.
Disney Plus is a distribution method for Marvel now. I mean, let's just call it what it is. And there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it is what it is, but at the same time, I think these companies would do so much better if they said, hey, let's just write comics and let's take off 50% of the political positions, mix it into it, and blend it a little bit better. And I think that they would get the exact same result, and they might even get a better result.
And honestly, my position has always been, not even in comics, but even in my other profession as an attorney, as soon as you mix politics into your business, you just knocked out 50% of your base.
Whether
doesn't matter what side you're writing for. As soon as you mix politics in, you've knocked out 50% of your base. And why would you do that?
I run. You're an attorney. You're a sole practitioner. I don't think you're gonna mind me saying that.
Yeah.
I run an eBay business. My eBay business, I'm selling you a comic book. We don't need to talk about my political views. You don't need to know my position on the Ukraine war. You don't need to know my position on the gas or the president, because you know what you need to know my position on? How am I going to ship your book so that book arrives perfectly? Now, you might hear me bitching and complaining, saying, man, the post office is really ramming it up me with the extra $5 that they're charging me for my shipping. But that's not political. That's me bitching that, the post office is really fucking me over with shipping.
Yeah. And it's going up, by the way.
Yeah, I'm not happy about it.
Yeah, I just got some little thing in my mail that postage is going up.
But again, that's not political, because I think everybody gets it. Or it's sudden with the eBay, 1099Ks, I'm like, hey, what the fuck does this mean? I'm really pissed off at the Biden administration, because they're making it difficult for me to do business. And I bitched about that on Facebook, but you know what? So has everybody else. And it's not a political position. It's saying, what the hell does this mean?
Right.
And so that's the whole thing but I think that I agree. Anytime you mix politics with something, but there's a lot of cool stuff that's coming out with this. I got some stuff to show with this. So this is the retro covers that you can get all the good stuff here. And so obviously Team Beetle's there, and you could get Team Beetle by itself.
And I promise it will be in color.
Yes, I just don't have the color.
Yeah, we don't either. I don't have it either. I think they're still in the process of being colored.
I mean, look, everybody, I got a preview copy of issue 2.
Yeah.
And it's not fully colored, so it will be, though. It will be. I'm just letting you know that that's where we're at with this project, and I have no game in this project. I have no claims to this project, but obviously, right there, it's colored, which is cool. And these are the cover.
Yeah, that's the Del Barris cover.
And I'm just going to say this before anybody gets upset. There is a book called Trump's in here. It's not about the president.
It's about cards.
About cards. There's also something called Switchblade in here, and it's not about knives either, per se. I just want to get that crystal clear.
And Team Beetle is not about insects. So.
And then these are also the exclusive, Kickstarters covers, and these will not be sold outside of the Kickstarter. So if you like these covers, one of them or all of them,
exactly. I will mention, just to give a shout out for him, that Teen Beetle cover that you just showed, that's done by Ben Dunn. So if any of you are fans of Antarctic Press and Ben's work with manga, Antarctic Press was the first manga company in the United States, and Ben was so gracious as to do that cover for us. For this
book, I just can't take it. It's this book called Ninja High School. I don't know if you heard about it.
Yeah, yeah. Gold Digger, I think, is another one. Or was that Fred Perry? I think did Gold Digger.
I mean, Ben backed my Kickstarter in January. So, and I just picked up Cat Shit 1. So I couldn't pick up the Girls in Ninja High School because instead I picked up Cat Shit 1, which I mean, Cat Shit 1. I mean, I read Cat Shit 1 illegally, I'll add. And then I bought it legally. Because I absolutely love the concept of Cat Shit 1.
Yeah.
And then when I said to Ben, he's like, I understand. He completely understood why I picked Cat Shit 1 over his book. But I
Ben's
did get
another really good guy. Ben actually did, kind of throw this back, Ben actually did a run for us with the Nikolai series. He created a 3-issue run called Turnbuckle Titans and put the Nikolai book in comic stores for us. So that was a nice little gesture on their behalf.
I really enjoy Ben Dunn. Ben Dunn's been on, I think, 3 or 4 times. And what was crazy with my last interview with Ben Dunn, I had Ben Dunn, and then I followed Ben Dunn up with Steph Wilson, of all people. So it's like I had like 3 hours of like Ben Dunn with Steph Wilson. I'm like, oh snap! Like this is like a power
Yeah,
Tuesday. Very
nice.
interesting Tuesday, and a lot of people were watching. A lot of people were like, "Oh, okay, this is kind of cool." And
Yeah.
I don't know how I pulled it off. So that's all I'm going to say. And then you also have T-shirts too,
Yes.
with that. So that's the other thing too is that you got T-shirts that you could pick up if you're into T-shirts and you're looking at stuff. And then obviously, just with this entire campaign, I'm going to just say it. And obviously, if you want to know more about this stuff, look up the Roland Man interview. That was legitly not the interview before this one, but the one two before
Gotcha.
yesterday, because there was one in the middle. I'm sorry. It
And
just
for
worked out.
those who may not have seen it, I mean, this Kickstarter with Silverline is very professionally run. For those of you who don't really know Roland, Roland is the former editor for Malibu Comics division of Marvel Comics. He teaches comic book writing at Full Sail University here in Central Florida. He really knows his stuff. He's very professional. Me, I've worked with Ben Dunn. I've worked with Kevin Eastman at Heavy Metal. I've worked with the very difficult Amanda Rachels at Squared Circle. But Roland Man is on you. I mean, he send this in, send it back, fix this, send it back. Never had a guy quite like that. But he's teaching me, just like he teaches all the kids that are paying that tuition. And I'm learning from him. And he really knows how to run a professional Kickstarter and put out a very professional book.
It's something that I'm actually curious about, because one of the things is that I am now getting frustrated on Kickstarter, where
Yeah.
I've actually lost faith in the platform.
Mm.
I ran one and I had a not so great experience.
Yeah.
People were not the platform itself, but people were just brutal to me in the social media realm of it.
Yes.
And then the other thing as a consumer, why I'm losing faith right now, is there have been books that were supposed to come to me in January that are now starting to get out. I back books that are been over a year that are starting to happen. There's
Yeah.
another book that company is having a big problem, and there were some allegations in the gaming world. And if you're not aware of that, it's not that hard to figure out which company that is. There is only one that's having that problem. And then on top of that, there's somebody who had a book that is 3 months late and they're only 40% done with it, and it's a graphic novel. And in
Wow.
the process, we've ran like 2 campaigns that have done almost 40,000. And
Wow.
so I've had about 4 to 6 bad experiences. Actually, there's another book that's also a disaster. So it's about 6 books that I've had problems with.
Yeah.
And being a month late isn't a problem for me because I get that shit happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's when you're multiple months late, or you say, hey, I'm only 40% done when this book was supposed to come out to you, X. And so, and one of them gets a pass because there was a bigger crisis. But the only reason why I'm talking about it is that when you have 4 or 5 of those problems happening all at once, I've lost faith. So and this is what I think Silverline doesn't do,
Mm-hmm.
is that, and that's where, so I'm curious how you feel about this, because as a consumer, I'm probably going to take 6 to 8 months off for the most part on Kickstarter.
Hey, I completely get you. I've backed, I want to say, close to 200 projects on Kickstarter over the past 5 or 6 years. I've got some where I've never received a book to this day. I had it multiple times on Indiegogo, so I just quit using Indiegogo altogether. But
I backed one Indiegogo. I've actually backed 2. One of them was Rusty Gilligan.
Okay, yeah.
My mom's a postcard fan. And
Yeah.
I got addressed to my mom because Rusty was on my show, and I love Rusty. That guy's fantastic.
Yeah, he's a big wrestling fan too.
Yeah. And then I backed Dashiell's Shotgun Samurai, because if you got a book called Shotgun Samurai, I gotta read it. It's a manga, and he delivered really, really well. And I know him. He's been on my show again, and it's absolutely, it's a fantastic, and he was perfectly on time. But it's also print on demand, what I ordered it from.
But anyone who's on the fence with these, with Squared Circle, we never start a Kickstarter until the book is done. Our books have actually already been sent off to the printer. We did it a little bit earlier than normal this time because, for those who don't know, there's a paper shortage right now, which has caused some backup with some of the publishing and things like that. So,
well aware.
Yeah. So with Kickstarter, at least with Squared Circle, we will not start a Kickstarter until the book is completed. So that one's taken care of. With Silverline, I know Jeremy Kahn, who's doing the colors on Teen Beetle. We got a message in the group chat that he should have those colors done sometime this week. And the Kickstarter, I think, ends on the 24th. So once again, that book should be completed. Still needs to go to the printer. I think Roland holds off sending that to the printer until he knows exactly how many pre-orders we have. So I think both of these books, both of these projects, there aren't going to be any concerns about getting your books on time. With my Bushwhacker book that I mentioned, that's coming out next month. Again, the book is done. Kenny Casanova, I don't know if you know Kenny in the world of professional wrestling, but he's written books for Brutus Beefcake. I think he wrote Vader's book. Wrote a bunch of them. Anyway, he's helping me with the formatting, and we'll have that book entirely formatted. I just did a post before you and I came on. I got my limited cover back from Richard Bonk and Adam Riches. Adam does a lot of the product.
Adam's doing this show.
So Adam did all of our logos and cover design. And
so for those who don't know Adam did the action figures for Boom Studio for WWE. In case you didn't know that, Adam also did a lot of Johnny Gargano's gear at the NXT. So all the comics that Johnny Gargano was wearing, for those who don't know, that was Adam's design. Adam also designed Mickey James's WrestleMania 33 gear, I want to say. Yep. So that's the thing that Adam has done.
Absolutely. And Adam does a lot he works with Hasbro Toys and does all the G.I. Joe stuff. So Adam did all of our logo and cover design for the Bushwhackers book. I'm doing a limited edition artist cover. We're only going to run off 50 copies of it. And that cover art was actually done by Richard Bonk, who's done a lot of work with DC Comics and Dark Horse and Top Cow. So we'll run off about 50 of those. And then we've got a standard cover that, again, the cover design was done by Adam. And we've gotten some exclusive photos from George Napolitano, some of the stuff he did back in the day with the sheep herders and such. And that'll be our standard cover on that book. But again, that's another example of, I won't even set up a Kickstarter and run it until I'm done, because I know as a consumer, I've been screwed multiple times. So the last thing I'm going to do is screw somebody over on my end.
I mean, with mine is a revolving door where people need an interview or advertising at different realms. So you have about a year to claim it. But I sent everybody the booking link, it started before the campaign even ended. And so look, here's the booking link, guys. And, I'm letting you know that you get first grabs at this. And so you let me know when you need your ad, you let me know when you need your stuff, and I'm going to take care of you. And I'm reminding like 15 people still. I'm like, hey guys, look, I want to run another project, but I want to make sure you guys understand that you got an interview that I owe you. Like, what are we doing here? If you need it in November, I'm cool with that. Just give me the heads up.
Absolutely. Speaking of which, I wouldn't mind. We can talk about it at a later time. Once we get that Bushwhacker book ready, maybe coming in with Luke, or maybe Luke and Butch, all three of us.
Yeah. Usually I like to have 4 because it makes it a nice thing, but 3 is fine.
And around this time, our time frame with Butch, we used to laugh and call them our 3-ways. We would do our 3-ways every Wednesday night, which we'd start at usually around 8:00 my time here, which is Eastern time, which is good for me and Luke. And that's around 10:00 in the morning for Butch in New Zealand. So it was perfect.
I've done people from I've done Sean, Keep or Kemp. It's short. He does Ecstasy. That comic, and I've done Morgan Quaid or Morgan V Quaid. Or Quad. I forget how it's said, and he's in Australia. And I like doing people from Australia. I have no problem. And so I can really do any schedule for anybody at the moment. And so obviously I'm more than happy to have anybody on, in that realm. Anything you could send me ahead of time is always helpful. Even if it's a chapter or two, because I will actually read it. Because but I have a feeling the interview is going to take care of itself. But
those guys are a trip. What's that?
But I don't want to ruin anything else for this book.
So.
But yeah, no. And obviously, I mean, my whole take on Kickstarter is that it's going to be, I'm being very selective and I'm very tentative, because right now my whole take is I'm just hurt. because I've been burned, and it's just been like 6 of them. One of them I'm gonna get taken care of because I know the books are coming in this Friday.
Yeah.
And not to shame him, and he knows I'm gonna say, and I'm not gonna say who it is, but the other 4, I'm really hurt, and I know those people too, and that's my biggest problem is that it's not personal because I'm not the only person getting fucked, but one of them, there was a bigger crisis going on. I'm not going to say who it is because everybody knows it and everybody knows that everything's going to get taken care of. But it's also the idea that it just drives me crazy because I don't operate that way. You know, in my eBay business, if I'm 3 days late, that's a big deal. I'm shipping out a book.
You know what it's like in the law practice if you're 3 days late.
I know exactly. My father's a lawyer,
Time is of the essence.
There's a difference. If you're 3 days late, depending on certain things, it's a big deal. But you know, if it's still within the deadlines and you're filing an issue, and you're fine. I'm well aware of serving time. I'm well aware of litigation. I'm well aware of all of that.
And when clients are paying that kind of money, they don't want you being put off. They don't want to be put off, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. They want it yesterday.
But believe me, my father, and I'm not going to totally speak, but he gets annoyed when a client's not getting back to him. So it's because my father is a very, very, very well-organized individual.
Absolutely.
And I don't like to be late either. It's very rare that I'm late, and I like to be on time. But also, I'm a good government employee, meaning that if I finish my job in 4 hours, I'll make like I look like I finished it in 7. So I'm the antithesis of a lawyer. I was going to become a lawyer, but then I realized that becoming a senator is a lot more fun. So there you go.
Exactly, and a lot more lucrative.
But I digress on that. I will be the next president of the United States at some point. I'm telling you, there's going to be National Comic Days. Batman's going to be a national. Batman's birthday, September 27th, is going to be a federal holiday. I'm just calling it right now. It's something personal, but I'm definitely going to get that thing signed into law. I'm going to get it codified, if you will.
Just enter an executive order. That's what everybody's doing it now.
It's like a Saturday Night Live thing. The bill, they're teaching how to do a bill, and then Obama just shoves the bill down, and then there's an easy way to do it. Executive order.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
All the cool kids are doing them now.
Brilliant skit by SNL because it's funny. And that's one of the funniest things I've seen in the last 10 years by SNL. But anyway, I digress. Enough politics. That's not what this show's about.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think anybody's going to get angry about that joke because it's pretty funny, that skit. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. But obviously, we've been speaking about a lot of stuff. And I do want to give you a chance to promote yourself. So where can people find you? Where can people bother you? Where can people go check out Silverline? I did not put the Silverline thing in the link above, but I did put this Kickstarter in the link above. So obviously, if you're looking for Silverline, go to the Rolling Man interview. I need the views, just to be very honest. So go watch the interview, and then if you want the Silverline stuff, use that link. If you want the wrestling stuff, obviously use the link in the show notes above, below, to the side, wherever it's at. But beyond that, where can people bother you, hit you up, get stuff from you? If they don't see something on this campaign, where can they get it? All that fun stuff.
Okay, well, people, if you're looking at the screen, you see my name on there. You can find me just about everywhere. I mean, and I use my name, so I'm on Facebook. I have a personal page. I generally accept all friends on there, or you can follow me on there. I've also got a writer's page on Facebook. It's Johnny Crowther, comic book writer. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Tumblr, even though that one's kind of lame. I think I got like 5 followers there. So, hey, anybody even uses Tumblr? I don't know. You can find both campaigns on Kickstarter right now. There's Terry Funk book. Just look up Terry's name. You can look up Silverline Comics. It's called the Superhero Extravaganza. Terry's actually, you want to get on Terry's if you're interested, because that one ends this weekend. It actually ends on the 17th, I think at 9 o'clock Eastern time at night. Silverline runs till the 24th, so you got a little bit more time on that one. You can find Silverline again on Facebook, on Instagram. I believe they're on Twitter as well. Squared Circle Comics. Same thing. You can find them on Facebook. You can find them on Instagram. You can find them on Twitter. We welcome all followers. You can find back catalogs. Personally, if you write me, I have just about every comic that I've ever done. Some people like to get them through me because I'll sign them for you. If you don't get them through me, I'll mail them to you. Otherwise, you can catch me at shows. My next con, Daytona Beach Comic Con, September 10 and 11, is on the books. I know I've got a couple in November. I think one's in Lake County. All of these are in Florida, of course. And if you're a big wrestling fan, it's now a while. I just finished it up, but next June, River City Wrestling Con in Jacksonville, Florida. It's the biggest wrestling convention in the state of Florida, and it is kick ass. I mean, last year, their headliners were Diamond Dallas Page, the Hardy Boys, and Kevin Nash. It's always a really good show. I spent a lot of time chatting with Ron Simmons at that one. They had Eric Butterbean Esch, Medusa. Gosh, great lineups every year. Really friendly folks. They got live wrestling during the show. So I'd recommend checking that out. I'll be at that again next June, but you can look that one up too. And I hope to see everybody. I like what I do, and I like meeting people. So.
Yeah, and I'm just going to keep saying it, and I'm going to say what I've been saying for almost 3 years now. You got to support indie. And what that means is you got to back Kickstarters, you got to back independent projects, you got to hit people up, you got to say, hey, money, here's some money, because it does require, and these projects do require that to make them printable, for lack of a better word here. But even going further than that, obviously, you need to support people on social media. You need to follow people on social media. You need to follow their newsletters, their Facebook pages, all that stuff, because that also matters. And it does go a long way, and you need to share it out. A share is just as valuable as
Absolutely.
a $5 Kickstarter, buy me a coffee, Indiegogo contribution, because it does let people know, say, hey, here's the project, here's what's going on, and you never know who's watching, and it can mean the difference, or it could lead to something bigger. And so it is very important to do that. And if you do actually back this project, then what you should do is you should also share it out, because guess what? It's gonna be helpful, and it's a vote of confidence.
Absolutely.
Kickstarter makes it easy, guys. They make it easy. Saying you just backed this project, share it on Twitter, Facebook, or elsewhere. I think they have like a Pinterest button now too.
Do they?
So they got everything. They got everything. And they say, congratulations. And the confetti comes out. It's wonderful. And then and it's a good feeling all around, everybody, when you back something. So I recommend you do that, because it does make a difference. And then as far as I'm concerned, obviously I'm an independent project. I appreciate when people share out my stuff. I really do. It means a lot to me when somebody shares it out, comments on it, engages with me, likes my Facebook page, likes my Instagram, likes my Twitter. They want to friend me on Facebook. It's always nice. It means something. If I didn't say it already, subscribe on YouTube. That is helpful. I also appreciate money. But again, I know everybody's in a different financial bubble, and I'm not here to exclude anybody from anything. So if you can't donate money, sharing is free, and that means something. So retweet my tweets, share out the interview, like the interview, shoot me a DM, say, hey, really appreciated the interview. Or I just interviewed the voice actress of Nurse Joy, the original one, say, yo, man, that was an awesome interview. Keep doing it. It means a lot to me, because, not every day is a peachy day for me. So those messages definitely help. So that's all I'm going to say. Also, obviously, use my supply code from BCW Supplies, Pop Anime Comics, 10% off. You can buy my t-shirt, which is right here. You could also go to my eBay store, which is Pop Anime Comics Collectibles. This is the Kickstarter exclusive. It is on eBay right now. It's a metal card. So you can buy those if you're so inclined to. Ben Dunn bought one of those. So if you want to be like Ben Dunn, go do that. I don't know if Ben Dunn wants me to say that, but I just did. I got a bunch of cool people coming on in the next few weeks. And Pat Shan at some point in July will be coming back on, and we're going to be doing some trading card stuff. So obviously that's going to be fun, and talking about those types of things with Xenoscope. And there's some fun stuff going. And October 5th, my class is launching to teach you how to invest in comic books. So if you want to learn how to make money buying, selling comic books, we're going through the fundamentals, and it's going to be an 18 to 22 hour class. It's intense, guys. And I'm trying to keep it as low cost as effective. I'm going to try to keep it around $50 or less, because I think it's a fair price. If I'm giving you 20 hours of content, for 40 to 50 bucks, that's where we're at. But enough about that. On that note, I'm going to give you the final word.
Thanks again. Thanks for having me on. If you're a fan of Terry Funk, grab this book. I guarantee you won't regret it. And it'll be giving back to him as well. And check out Teen Beetle. If you loved comics in the 80s, if you love that fun, exciting superhero kind of stuff, check it out and give it a try. And again, it's been great chatting with Andrew. I appreciate you having me on. I'd love to come back again, maybe bring a couple wrestlers with me and talk about the stuff I love. So it'd be a lot of fun.
Well, on that note, everybody, that is a wrap.